My mom passed away suddenly a few months ago from a hospital infection. I still can hardly believe it happened the way it did, but that wasn't even the worst part. Losing her so unexpectedly was already unbearable, but what made it worse was how fast everything changed. Not even 2 months had gone by when my dad started seeing someone. My own aunt, Mom's younger sister. The whole thing made my stomach churn, but I didn't have a say in it, so I just kept quiet. Little did I know, things were about to take a turn for the unimaginable. It all started one dreary evening. Dinner had just ended, and I barely made it through, listening to my aunt's chirpy talk about her day and school stuff. She acted like everything was fine, like she hadn't taken my mom's place at the table and in Dad's life. As soon as I could, I escaped to my room, pretending I had homework to do. I sat in front of my laptop, staring at the screen, but my mind was swimming in grief, my heart heavy with memories of Mom. Since she died, I had not been able to focus on anything for long. I clicked away from my homework and stared at my desktop background, a photo from a few years back. It was taken at a family gathering. Mom and my aunt were sitting next to each other, both smiling, looking so similar, yet so different. Dad was sitting beside Mom, and I was leaning against him. We all looked so happy, and Mom had her arms wrapped around both Dad and my aunt. I missed her so much it hurt. Just then, the little chat box in the corner of my screen started flashing. That surprised me a bit. It was an old app I had not used in ages, one I kept meaning to delete. But what really made my blood run cold was what happened next. My mom's profile picture blinked into the chat box, followed by a message that sent a chill down my spine. "Hello, Ben. It is me, Mom." Fear gripped me instantly. I stared at the screen, frozen. This had to be some sort of sick prank, or maybe a hacker was messing with me. Still, I could not move. I glanced over my shoulder at the door, which was closed while the sound of the television hummed from the living room. My aunt always kept the TV on, even when she wasn't watching it. "Do not be afraid, Ben. It is really me. I found a way to talk to you, my sweet boy. I have missed you so much." My heart pounded in my chest. If this was some kind of twisted joke, it was beyond cruel. Tears welled up in my eyes against my will. I wanted to shut the laptop, to turn it off and forget about it, but I could not. I could not stop myself from typing back with trembling fingers. "Mom, is it really you?" A reply came instantly, and it was like I could feel her impatience through the screen, just like she used to get when I did not catch on to things right away. "Of course it is me, Ben. I have come back to tell you something important." I had my own news to share, though I did not know why I felt the need to tell this thing that claimed to be Mom. "Did you know Aunt Lisa moved in last weekend?" "Yes, Ben, I know. That is why I have come to talk to you. You need to be strong, and I know you are. You have always been strong, my boy. But there is something you need to know. Something only you can handle." I felt a different kind of fear start to creep in. "What do you mean, Mom?" I typed, my hands shaking. There was a pause. For a moment I thought maybe it was over, but then the message came. "Ben, your Aunt Lisa, she killed me." I could feel my world shattering around me, like I had been hurled into a bottomless pit of terror. Deep down in some corner of my mind, I had felt something was wrong ever since Mom died. But to hear or see those words felt like confirmation of my worst nightmare. I just could not believe it. "Ben, are you there?" The message appeared again, snapping me back to reality. Her tone, the way it came through the screen, it was too familiar. It was exactly how Mom used to speak when she wanted to make sure I was paying attention. "Yes, Mom, but how?" "She was there, Ben. She was at the hospital when I got sick. She wasn't supposed to be working on my floor, but she made it happen. She made sure I would not walk out of there alive." Just then, the door to my room opened, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. My Aunt Lisa stood in the doorway, her face plastered with a forced smile. "Ben, are you all right? You look like you have seen a ghost," she said, stepping into the room. I quickly minimized the chat window, trying to regain my composure. I could barely look at her, my mind racing with what I had just read. She must have noticed how pale I looked because she sighed and moved closer. "Ben, I know you miss your mom, but you need to stop isolating yourself like this. It is hurting your dad, you know." He has been through enough already. I could not speak. I just stared at her, trying to hide the mixture of fear and disgust brewing inside me. Everything about her seemed off. Her smile, her tone, even the way she stood there, like she belonged here. But she didn't. She reached out and touched my arm, and I flinched so hard you would have thought she had hit me. "Oh, honey, you're still wearing black? I get it, but it has been months. How about we go to the mall and get you some new clothes? I think it will make you feel better." I shook my head furiously. Tears of frustration, anger, and fear threatened to spill over. Aunt Lisa opened her mouth to say something else, but then she stopped. Her eyes widened and a strange look came over her face. She was staring at my laptop. I followed her gaze and turned to see what she was looking at. My heart nearly stopped. The background on my screen had changed. It was no longer the happy family photo. Instead, it showed a new picture. Mom lying in a hospital bed, pale and lifeless, with Aunt Lisa standing next to her, leaning over her in a way that made my skin crawl. I barely had time to process what I was seeing before Aunt Lisa's face twisted into something horrible. Her expression turned from shock to fury in an instant. "What the hell are you doing?" she screamed, her voice sharp and filled with rage. She lunged at me so fast that I barely had time to react. I pushed back in my chair, raising my hands in a weak attempt to defend myself, but it was no use. She was on me, her hands grabbing for the laptop, for me, for anything she could get her fingers on. I felt her nails dig into my skin, her hot breath on my face as she shouted again, "Are you playing tricks on me?" The world was spinning, fear making it hard to think straight. I struggled to free myself from her grip, but before I could even get out of the chair, something impossible happened. A bright flash of light shot out from the laptop screen, crackling like static electricity, and hit Aunt Lisa square in the chest. She froze, her eyes wide with shock, and then she collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud. For a second, everything was still. I sat there in stunned silence, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Then reality came crashing back in, and I let out a scream that seemed to echo through the room. Aunt Lisa lay there, motionless. I could barely breathe as I stumbled to my feet, staring down at her limp body. Her eyes were still open, but there was no life in them. She was gone, just like that. The room felt ice cold as I stood there, shaking from head to toe. What had just happened? Was she really dead? Did I just kill her? My mind was racing with questions, but none of them made any sense. I took a step back, my legs feeling like jelly beneath me. The laptop was still glowing faintly on the desk, the screen flickering as if whatever had just happened was not done yet. I could not tear my eyes away from it. Then a message appeared on the screen. "Ben, you did the right thing. She cannot hurt you or anyone else anymore." I stared at the words, barely able to comprehend them. This was not possible. None of this was possible. But there it was, plain as day. The same chat box, the same profile picture of my mom. She was still there, somehow. "Mom, what did I just do?" I typed, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Her reply was quick, like she had been waiting for me to ask. "You protected yourself, Ben. You are safe now. She cannot take anything else from us." Safe? Was that what this was? I had just watched my aunt get struck down by some supernatural force coming from a computer, and somehow that was supposed to make me feel safe. I did not know what to think. I felt sick, my stomach churning with a mixture of fear, grief, and confusion. I glanced down at Aunt Lisa's body again, half expecting her to move, to jump up and grab me, but she remained still. I needed to get out of there. I needed to find Dad. I bolted out of my room and down the stairs, barely able to keep my balance as I rushed into the living room where Dad was sitting, his face buried in his hands. He looked up when he heard me, his eyes red from crying. "Ben, what's going on? Are you okay?" I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I wanted to tell him everything, to explain what had just happened. But how could I? How could I possibly explain something like this? Before I could say anything, Dad stood up and walked over to me, his expression full of concern. "Ben, talk to me. What's wrong?" Where's Lisa? I opened my mouth to answer, but the words would not come. I just pointed back toward my room, my hand trembling as I did. Dad frowned, looking confused, but he started moving toward the stairs. I followed him, my heart racing as we reached the doorway to my room. Dad stepped inside and, for a moment, the world seemed to stop. He froze, staring down at Aunt Lisa's body sprawled on the floor. The color drained from his face, and for a long time, he just stood there in stunned silence. Then he slowly turned toward me, his voice shaking. "Ben, what happened?" I had no idea what to say. How could I possibly explain any of this? It all sounded insane, even to me, and I had been there. I looked from Dad to Aunt Lisa's lifeless body, then back to the laptop, where the screen had gone dark. There was no sign of the messages, no trace of the conversation I had with Mom, if that was even real. I don't know, I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. She just fell. It was a lie, or at least part of one. But what else could I say? I could not tell him about the chat box, about the strange messages from Mom. He would never believe me. Dad knelt beside Aunt Lisa, checking her pulse, but there was nothing. He looked up at me, his face a mix of grief and disbelief. "We need to call the police," he muttered, his voice hollow. I nodded, but I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare that I could not wake up from. The house felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me as Dad called the police. I stood there frozen, my body numb, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Aunt Lisa lay lifeless in my room, and no matter how I tried to make sense of it, I couldn't. One minute she was screaming at me, the next she was gone. And the laptop, Mom's words still echoed in my head. "You protected yourself." Protected myself from what? From Aunt Lisa? But how? I had not done anything. Had I? Dad was on the phone, his voice low and strained as he explained that there had been an accident. That word felt wrong in my ears. This was no accident. But what else could he say? Who would believe the truth? The police arrived quickly, too quickly. It felt like I had barely blinked and suddenly our home was filled with officers, paramedics, and questions. I watched from the hallway as they examined Aunt Lisa's body. They asked Dad a million questions, and he answered as best he could, but he was just as lost as I was. When one of the officers finally turned to me, I felt my heart drop into my stomach. "Hey there, kiddo. Can you tell me what happened?" The officer's tone was calm, gentle, like he was talking to a scared child, which I suppose I was, but it felt patronizing. I don't know," I muttered, my voice shaking. "We were in my room, and then she fell." The officer frowned, clearly unsatisfied with my vague answer, but he did not press me. He asked a few more basic questions. How long had she been living with us? Had I noticed anything strange about her behavior? But I gave him nothing. I just kept my head down, hoping they would leave soon and take this nightmare with them. The paramedics confirmed what I already knew. Aunt Lisa was dead. They didn't say much, just muttered something about a possible heart attack. But I knew better. It wasn't her heart that had killed her. It was whatever came from the laptop. Eventually, the police left, and the house fell quiet again. But it wasn't the comforting kind of quiet I was used to. It was the kind of silence that creeps into your bones, that makes you feel like you're never alone, even when the house is empty. Dad and I sat in the living room, both of us staring at nothing. He hadn't said much since the police left. I think he was still in shock. I was too, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to all of this. The messages from Mom, the photo of Aunt Lisa by her hospital bed. It all swirled in my mind, leaving me dizzy with confusion and fear. "Ben," Dad said suddenly, breaking the silence. I looked up at him, my stomach tightening with dread. "Do you know what happened in there? I mean, really?" His eyes were hollow, his face pale. He looked like he was hanging onto the edge of a cliff, and the slightest push would send him over. I didn't want to lie to him, but how could I tell him the truth? That his dead wife had somehow spoken to me through a laptop and told me that her own sister had killed her? That Aunt Lisa had been struck down by some supernatural force right in front of me? I shook my head slowly. I don't know, Dad. I really don't. He sighed heavily, rubbing his hands over his face. I don't understand. First your mom, now Lisa. I feel like I'm losing everything. His words hit me hard. I had been so caught up in my own fear and confusion that I hadn't thought about how all of this was affecting him. He had lost 2 women he loved in less than 4 months, and now he was left with nothing but unanswered questions and a son who couldn't even tell him the truth. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay, but I didn't believe that myself. Nothing about this felt okay. Nothing felt normal. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events of the day over and over. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Aunt Lisa's face twisted in rage, her body crumpling to the floor. And behind it all, I heard my mom's voice, clear as day, telling me that Aunt Lisa had killed her. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making you hyper-aware of every creak, every rustle. I kept expecting to hear something, another message, another sign that Mom was still there, trying to reach out to me. But the laptop remained dark and silent, just like Aunt Lisa. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. But my dreams were filled with shadows, with flashes of hospital rooms and distorted faces. I saw Aunt Lisa standing over Mom's bed, her hands slick with something dark and oily. I heard Mom's voice, faint and distant, calling my name. And through it all, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible was coming, something I couldn't escape. When I woke the next morning, the feeling hadn't left. It clung to me like a second skin, making every breath feel heavy. I dragged myself out of bed and went downstairs, half expecting to find something, anything, that would explain what was happening. But the house was just as I had left it, except for one thing. Dad was gone. At first I thought maybe he had gone out for a walk or to run some errands. But as the minutes ticked by and he didn't come back, panic started to set in. I searched the house from top to bottom, calling his name over and over, but there was no answer. His car was still in the driveway, his keys hanging on the hook by the door. It was like he had just vanished. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my phone and dialed his number. It rang and rang, but there was no answer. I tried again. Nothing. That same sinking feeling I had felt the night before returned, stronger now. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. I rushed back up to my room, my hands trembling as I powered up the laptop. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I knew I needed answers. The screen flickered to life, and for a moment, nothing happened. But then, just as I was about to give up, the chat box blinked open. Ben! It was her. Mom. I'm so sorry, Ben. My stomach dropped. Sorry for what? I typed, my hands shaking. Her response was almost immediate. For taking him. I had to. It's the only way. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. For taking him? I typed, the fear swelling in my chest. What do you mean, Mom? Where is Dad? There was a pause. The little icon indicating she was typing flickered on and off, and I held my breath, waiting for her answer. It's not safe, Ben. Not for him. Not for you. The words made no sense. My mind raced, trying to understand what she meant. Why would she take him? Where could she have possibly taken him? And how could any of this be real? What do you mean? What's not safe? I typed furiously, my hands trembling over the keyboard. Where is Dad? Again, there was a pause. Then the next message appeared. He's with me now. He'll be safe here, away from her. My stomach twisted into a knot. Her? I typed. Do you mean Aunt Lisa? She's dead, Mom. You saw what happened? Yes, I know. The response was quick this time. But it's not just her. There's more you don't understand yet. More I need to show you. The room felt like it was spinning. I wanted to scream, to throw the laptop across the room, to wake up from this nightmare. But something held me in place. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the desperate need to know what was going on. But whatever it was, I could not stop myself from typing. Show me what? The truth. Her reply was chilling in its simplicity. I need you to understand what happened to me, why I had to come back. I didn't want to understand. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted my life back. I wanted Dad back. But I was in too deep now, and there was no turning back. Tell me, I typed, my fingers hovering over the keys as if they were moving on their own. I need to know. The chat box went quiet for a moment, and I held my breath. Then slowly, the next message appeared. It all started with the hospital. You remember, don't you? When I got sick? Of course I remembered. How could I ever forget? My mom had gone in for something routine, a surgery that was supposed to be straightforward. But then things went wrong. She got an infection. They said it was rare, that it was just bad luck. But now, yeah, I replied. I remember. It wasn't an accident. My blood ran cold. I could barely make my fingers move, but I forced myself to keep typing. What do you mean? How wasn't it an accident? I was given that infection on purpose, Ben. I wasn't supposed to survive. The room seemed to tilt as I read the words. My head spun with the impossibility of it all. That's crazy, I typed, though I didn't even believe my own words. Who would do that to you? The typing icon flickered for a long time before the next message came. Aunt Lisa, but she wasn't working alone. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The air was sucked out of the room, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. It was one thing to believe that Aunt Lisa had a hand in Mom's death, but to think that there was more to it, more people involved. Who could it be? What are you talking about? I finally managed to type. Who else was involved? There's a reason I had to come back, Ben. A reason why I can't just rest. There's something bigger happening, something that's been going on for a long time. And now they're coming for you too. A shiver ran down my spine. Who's coming for me? There was a long pause before she answered, and when the message finally appeared, it made my blood turn to ice. The same people who killed me. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what she was saying. The same people who killed her? How could that be? Aunt Lisa was dead. If there were others, who were they? And why would they come after me? I don't understand, I typed, feeling a mix of fear and frustration building inside me. What do they want from me? Why would they come after me? The response was immediate. Because you're part of this now. They can't let you live knowing what you know. They'll come for you, just like they came for me. My breath caught in my throat. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. But deep down, I knew it was. I had felt it ever since Mom's death. Something lurking just beneath the surface. Something dark and terrible that I couldn't explain. And now it was coming for me. What do? I asked, the words barely making it onto the screen as my hands shook with terror. You need to leave, Ben. Get out of the house. Get as far away as you can. Leave? Go where? I couldn't just leave. Dad was gone. Mom was... Well, whatever Mom was now, she wasn't here to protect me. And whoever these people were, they knew how to find me. They had already taken everything from me. But before I could type another word, the chat box flickered and a new message appeared. They're here. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach as I read those words. I froze, staring at the screen in horror. Who's here? I typed, even though I already knew the answer. The ones who took me. They found you, Ben. You need to run. Now! My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I looked around the room, my mind racing. The house was silent, but I knew that wouldn't last. If they were really here, if they were coming for me. Without another thought, I jumped up from my chair and bolted out of the room. The house felt claustrophobic, every shadow hiding something sinister, every creak of the floorboards sending a fresh wave of panic through me. I grabbed my shoes, barely getting them on before I heard something. A noise from outside, a car door slamming, voices low and muffled, but unmistakable. I was out of time. I threw open the front door, running into the night without looking back. The cold air hit me like a wall, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. My legs moved on their own, fueled by pure fear as I sprinted down the street, not even sure where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. Behind me, I could hear the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. They were getting closer. I kept running, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. The cold air burned my lungs, but I couldn't stop. I could hear them behind me, the steady, deliberate footsteps that seemed to echo louder with every passing second. I didn't dare look back. I had no idea where I was going or what I would do once I got there. My feet pounded against the pavement, carrying me farther and farther from the house, but I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. I was no athlete, and fear could only push me so far. My legs were already starting to burn, the muscles screaming in protest. But I didn't have a choice. I had to keep going. Up ahead, the streetlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the road. I swerved down a side street, hoping to lose whoever was following me, but the footsteps didn't stop. They were right on my heels and they were gaining on me. I tried to think, to come up with a plan, but my mind was a whirlwind of terror and confusion. My heart was hammering so loudly in my ears that I could barely hear anything else. All I knew was that I couldn't let them catch me. If they did, I would end up like Mom. The memory of her final message flashed in my mind and a cold chill ran down my spine. They're here. Who were they? What did they want from me? And why was I the next target? As I rounded another corner, I spotted a park up ahead. It was dark, the trees casting deep shadows, but it was my only option. I veered off the road and darted into the park, my feet slipping on the damp grass as I plunged into the darkness. The footsteps behind me faltered for a moment, as if they had lost sight of me. I took the chance and dove behind a thick tree, crouching down and trying to steady my breathing. My whole body was trembling, and I felt like I might throw up from the adrenaline coursing through me. I pressed my back against the rough bark and listened. Silence. For a moment, I dared to hope that I had lost them. Maybe they had given up. Maybe I had managed to escape. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel path nearby. They were still here, and they were close. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest, and every muscle in my body was screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to wait for the right moment. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear them moving slowly, methodically, as if they were searching for something, or someone. Me. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that they wouldn't find me. But then, just as I thought they might pass me by, I heard a voice. Low and chilling, it cut through the darkness like a knife. "Ben!" I froze. It was the same voice I had heard on the phone earlier, the one I had mistaken for Mom. But now up close, I could hear the difference. It wasn't her. It had never been her. "Ben, come out. There's nowhere left to run." The voice was closer now, almost right on top of me. My heart was thudding so loudly in my chest that I was sure they could hear it. I pressed my hands to my mouth, trying to stifle the sound of my breathing. "You can't hide forever, Ben," the voice taunted. "We'll find you. We always do." A cold sweat broke out across my skin. Who were these people? How did they know so much about me? And why were they so determined to catch me? I couldn't wait any longer. If I stayed here, they would find me. I had to move. Slowly, I inched away from the tree, keeping as low and quiet as possible. The darkness of the park worked in my favor, and I managed to slip away without making a sound. But the voice was still close, too close, and I knew it wouldn't be long before they realized I was gone. I darted through the trees, my eyes scanning the park for any sign of an exit. But the place was a maze, and in the dark, everything looked the same. I could feel the panic rising again, threatening to overwhelm me. My breaths were coming faster and faster, and I had to fight to keep from hyperventilating. "Ben," the voice called again, now farther away. "Come out, Ben. We don't want to hurt you. We just need to talk." I wanted to scream. The voice was mocking, teasing, as if they were enjoying this sick game of cat and mouse. But I couldn't let them get to me. I had to stay focused. Up ahead, I saw a break in the trees, a path. If I could just make it to the path, maybe I could find a way out of this nightmare. I took a deep breath, mustered every ounce of strength I had left, and sprinted toward the opening. But as I reached the path, something grabbed my arm. I screamed, instinctively jerking away, but the grip tightened, pulling me back with terrifying strength. I whirled around, expecting to see one of the figures that had been following me, but what I saw stopped my heart cold. It was Dad. His eyes were wide, wild with fear, and his face was pale as a ghost. He was shaking, his hand gripping my arm so hard it hurt. "Dad," I gasped, relief flooding through me. "What are you doing here? We have to get out of—" But he cut me off, his voice a frantic whisper. "No, Ben, you don't understand. They're not going to stop. They won't stop until they have you." His words sent a fresh wave of terror through me. "Who? Who are they?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He glanced over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows at any moment. "It's all my fault," he whispered, his grip tightening. "I never should have let them in. I never should have made that deal." "What deal?" I asked, my heart racing. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Before he could answer, a voice rang out from the darkness, chilling me to the bone. "There you are, Ben. We've been waiting for you." Dad's face went pale as the voice echoed through the darkness. He yanked me closer, his voice desperate and frantic. "Ben, listen to me," he hissed, his eyes wide with fear. "I tried to protect you, but there's no time to explain everything. You need to run, now." "But who are they? What do they want?" I stammered, my mind reeling with questions. This was all too much. Mom's mysterious death, the strange messages, and now this. "It's too late for questions." Dad's voice cracked, and for the first time I saw the sheer terror in his eyes. "They'll take you, Ben, just like they took her. You've got to go. Don't stop for anything." Before I could say anything else, a shadow emerged from the darkness. The figure cloaked in a long, tattered coat, its face obscured. There was an air of death around it, something far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. "Ben!" The voice was cold, emotionless. "You were promised to us." My blood turned to ice. "Go!" Dad shoved me so hard I nearly fell. "Run, Ben!" My legs kicked into gear, and I tore down the path, my mind spinning. Promised? What did that even mean? I didn't look back, though. Whatever these things were, they weren't human. I could feel their presence, heavy and unnatural, pressing against my skin. The park seemed endless, twisting and turning, the trees towering above me like dark sentinels. My heart was pounding, every breath coming in jagged gasps. I had to find a way out. Ahead, I saw the faint glow of streetlights, an exit, safety. I pushed myself harder, my muscles burning, every step fueled by pure fear. But as I reached the edge of the park, a figure stepped into the light, blocking my way. It was Aunt Claudia. She stood there perfectly still, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide and empty. But something was wrong. Her movements were stiff, unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. "Ben," she said softly, her voice monotone, void of emotion. "Come with us. It is time." I skidded to a stop, my chest heaving as panic overtook me. This was not Aunt Claudia. At least not anymore. Whatever she had become, it was no longer human. "Stay away from me," I shouted, backing up as her vacant eyes bore into me. "You cannot escape." The voice was no longer hers. It was deeper, darker, as though something else was speaking through her. Before I could move, she lunged at me, her arms outstretched, fingers curling like claws. I stumbled back, barely avoiding her grasp, and ran down the street, my feet pounding against the pavement. The houses blurred past me, their windows dark and lifeless. My legs were aching, and my lungs felt like they were going to burst, but I kept running. I had to get away. But then, just as I thought I might be able to outrun them, I felt the air change. The streetlights flickered above me, casting long, distorted shadows across the road. The temperature dropped sharply, and I could sense something moving, something inhuman. A voice echoed in my mind, deep and sinister. "You belong to us now, Ben. There is no escape." Suddenly, the world seemed to warp around me, the streets stretching into darkness, the houses melting into a blur of shadows. I stopped, gasping for breath, and spun around. The figures had closed in. They were all around me now, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They didn't speak, but their presence said everything. They had come for me. I backed up, my body trembling, my mind racing. Was this it? Was this how it ended? Just then, a cold, familiar voice cut through the air. "Stop!" The figures froze, and I turned to see Mom standing there. She was different than I remembered, paler, her face drawn and hollow, but her presence filled me with an odd sense of hope. "He is not yours," she said, her voice stronger than I expected. One of the figures stepped forward, its eyes glowing in the darkness. "He was promised to us. The deal was made." Mom shook her head. "Not by him, not by my son. I will not let you take him." There was a moment of silence, the air thick with tension, and then without a word, the figures began to retreat, melting back into the shadows, their glowing eyes fading into the darkness. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, my whole body trembling. Mom knelt beside me, her face softening. "I am sorry, Ben. I should have told you sooner. But I am here now. I will always protect you." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I reached for her, but she began to fade, her form dissolving into the air like smoke. "Mom!" I cried, but it was too late. She was gone. I sat there for a long time, alone in the dark, the silence heavy around me. Eventually, I pulled myself to my feet and made my way home. Dad was waiting for me on the porch, his face pale and worried. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I would ever be all right again. The nightmare was over, but the scars it left behind would never fade.